Hi, I'm Howard DeWitt. I'm here to talk about Van Morrison today and to introduce you one of the world's greatest fans of Van, a fanatic, and I'll save his name for later because most of you know him. Well, I'll give you his name now. It's Michael Seltzer from Detroit. Anyway, somebody asked me, where did your journey with Van begin? Well, very simply. In the early 1970s, I was working, if you can believe this, at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, 1971 to 75, as a field agent. And then later in September 75, I went back into teaching. Now, here's where the Van story begins. I go to Sunnyvale, California in the early 70s to the Safari Room. It's a cocktail lounge in a bowling alley near Stanford University and Hewlett-Packard. I come in, I'm paying $5 or $2.50, I don't know, you have to look it up, I can't remember, with my buddies, and we're bitching about the high cover charge, you know, and then the drinks come, and damn it, can you believe it? A drink was $1. $1. I got a bourbon and Coke. Usually the bartender gagged when I said I'll have a bourbon and Coke. And we sat down. Van comes out with a band of musicians from Marin County, probably David Hayes. I didn't pay any attention. Jeff Labus, Jack Schroer, and it was a wonderful concert. In the middle of the concert, all of a sudden you heard this booming announcement. Would the Hewlett-Packard bowling team please report to lane 7? So that was my introduction to Van. I left and I went back to teaching a couple years later. So I decided, Howard, it's time for you to do a course in rock and roll. So I started a course in rock and roll, and I thought, I'll do a book. So I did the Van book, and that came out in '83. It took me 8 years. Okay. So I'm doing other books. I'm writing books like, best-selling books like Anti-Filipino Movements in California. When I told Michael Seltzer about that book, he said, let me think about doing this video. I may not do it. So then finally, after working on Van from '83 when this book came out, finally in 2005, this came out, Them in the Bang era. And you can see it's a little larger. So I don't want to say I was impulsive or compulsive, obsessive or any of that nonsense, but I was. So anyway, I did this book, and then I continued on. I'm going to do 4 more. So then, if you could believe this, 16 years later, finally, this book comes out. Now, this one you'll love. It just came out. Van Morrison, Astro Weeks to Stardom, 68 to 72. Now, I'm in the process of editing a book called Van Morrison, It's Too Late to Stop Now, 1973 to 79, but I'm open to changing the title if anybody wants to, give me an opinion on the title. And then afterwards, I'm going to do 2 volumes from 1980 to the present. But if my editor, illustrator, publisher, the legendary Scott Amundsen will put up with me, I'm going to take those last 2 volumes and make them 4. Now I have to do this before I go see John Lennon, so it's going to take some time. What I want to do today is make a point. When I researched Van Morrison, I started, I guess about 1969, and paid attention to Astro Weeks. But before Astro Weeks, I do have an embarrassing story. In 1966, I'm outside the whiskey. Van Morrison is there with them, and of course, none other than the Doors with Jim Morrison. Now, I was teaching in Arizona, and if you can believe this, I had the rodeo club in Anaheim at a rodeo. Now, think of this. The kids are at a rodeo. I've got a car that says Cochise College on it. I drive it from Anaheim, park it off the Sunset Strip, and I'd been there for a number of times, and I do one of the go-go dancers, and I was sitting outside waiting to go see Van, or thinking I was going to go see Van, and I actually wanted to see the Doors. I hate to suggest that more than Van. And this go-go dancer I knew comes out, and she said, I don't like walking to my house. It's 8 blocks up the hill, and it's dangerous, and there's weirdos out. And oh boy, ooh la la, if you could, hope my wife doesn't watch this, if you could have seen her. So I decided to be a gentleman and walked her up. So I walked her up the hill, and she said, would you like a beer? Of course I'd like a beer. She said, sit down. So sit down. So now it's 10 o'clock at night, and we're having a beer, and I'm having a second beer, and I'm looking and going, ooh la la. And I said, how you doing? I'd met her the year before and seen her a couple times at parties. I knew Paul Revere, so I was with them, Paul Revere and the Raiders. So anyway, she says, oh yeah, I got a boyfriend now. Now it's midnight, and there's a knock on the door. She opens the door, and there was a guy who looked like a mobster, looked like a hitman, looked like an Italian who's going to first break your arms and legs and then strangle you. And there he was standing there. I'm thinking, oh, hell, what do I say now? And she said, oh, this is Howard. He's a professor. Well, fortunately, the mobster thought, hey, a professor, those guys don't know crap. So, I'll be nice to him. So anyway, we have another beer, and then we have another beer. So I'm looking at my clock thinking it's 1 o'clock, and I'm not sure how to get back down to the boulevard. This guy walks me down. We get down by the whiskey, and then I said, I'm not sure where I parked my car. So he's walking around. We find my car. Here's the end of the story. It's crazy. I get in the car and drive down Sunset Boulevard, and I'm not drunk or anything, but I've had a few, and all of a sudden I hear, roar! Pull the car over. Cop comes up and says, do you have your driver's license? In those days, I kept my money in a wad. I had this really neat silver sort of money clip. So I go for my wallet. Oh, crap. I said, sir, I don't have my wallet. He said, well, tell me who you are. I said, well, I'm a professor who brought the rodeo club from Arizona. And I left them in Anaheim, and now it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going back to stay with the kids there. He says, okay, so you're a professor driving a college car with no identification on you at 2 o'clock in the morning. How does that story sound to you? And I said, we'll call the kids. No cell phone. So we go to the station, and we call the kids. I finally get them on the phone. Now, these are cowboys, big, raw-boned 18, 19-year-old cowboys. One of them became the mayor, Wilcox. They're still friendly with a couple of them. Ruthie Cowan, who was a beauty queen, and she was well-known. The kids come up, and they're laughing like hell, and they let me go. So that's my van story. But let me shut up, if that's possible, and introduce you the man of the hour. Michael Seltzer represents what I consider a fanatic. He's knowledgeable. He's actually very humble. You won't be able to tell it by this thing. He's very knowledgeable. He's very humble. He shares his knowledge, and I'd like to have you listen to him today. And I'm going to try to say as little as possible, which I'm sure most of you know that's impossible. But I'd like to turn and have you meet the legendary, he didn't want me to call him legendary, so I'll say the almost legendary, from Detroit, Michigan, Michael Seltzer. And we're going to talk today. You won't believe this man. We got a whole spectrum of things, but let me give you the one thing that I'll never forgive him for. I cannot forgive Michael Seltzer for this. Van Morrison did 26 Astro Weeks concerts. Am I right, Michael?
Yes, you are.
How many did you attend?
Well, it was 21. And
21. I shouldn't ask this personal question. You are married.
Yes. Happily,
And
44 years.
Yes, 45. I know that.
She was with me for every one of those
yes,
gigs.
The lovely Lori. Yeah. I don't want you to tell me how much money you spent on this, but Scott and I, as a prize to you, we brought you an hour with an investment counselor. But the problem is, when he looked you up, he said, I don't want to tell Michael. I want to get Michael's advice. I don't want to tell Michael. So anyway, this is Michael Seltzer. Why don't you start out, if you would, and then you can talk about anything you want. Pat Corley, who's one of the great Fanatic fans, has a book called Fanatics, and a good guy, and there's a whole host of them, which we'll talk about. But tell me what you consider a Fanatic to be.
Well, I'll tell you what, Howard. We are this wonderful group of fans that have had the great opportunity to meet each other over our passion for Van Morrison, over decades of traveling all over the country and seeing Van Morrison gigs. And I cherish that, honestly, mostly because of the friendships that we've developed over this passion. And we've had the great opportunity, my wife and I, since we discovered Van back in the 70s and we were youngsters in high school, of meeting with so many Van addicts all over the world and sharing this love and passion. Pat's one. There's so many, I can't even begin to list them all. But these are people that have traveled all over the world, and we've come to know each other as friends, and we come from all different walks of life. And it's been a wonderful.
What have you learned about Van Morrison from the Fanatics?
Well, I mean, look, Van is a prolific songwriter, musician who has traveled over the past 60 years and covered every genre of music, from rock to soul to blues to jazz to country and everywhere in between. He cannot be branded as a particular musician. He plays a number of musical instruments, writes and sings and performs. And I've had the great pleasure of seeing him over 100 times all over the world. And it's a joy for me and a joy for so many of us that Van has given us this opportunity to get to know one another all over the world. So Van Addicts is a fair representation of who we are and our passion for Van. And I started back in the 70s when my wife and I had the opportunity to see him for the first time at the Fox Theater in Detroit. He came back twice and performed at the Masonic Temple back in the 70s. And then, of course, before the internet, we had no idea where he was because he vanished from Detroit. And it took a good 20 years before we recognized that he was traveling all over the world. And suddenly we were reintroduced to this great experience. I'll never forget the first gig I saw after 20 years was in New York at the Roseland Ballroom in New York City, small venue, with Taj Mahal. And my wife said I was shaking. I was so excited to see him after not seeing him for so many years. And because of the internet, I now knew that he was going to Chicago and New York and San Francisco and LA and London continuously all those years, and I missed those gigs. Well, I made it a point from that point forward to go to as many gigs as I possibly could.
How many gigs have you gone to?
It's over 100. I don't know, and I haven't kept track. I mean, there are so many notable experiences that we've had, from the Astro Weeks tour that began in 2008 and was supposed to be a one-off at the Hollywood Bowl. And after the reception that they got over this two-night experience, which was videotaped and recorded and released live at the Hollywood Bowl, we had that great opportunity to travel all over the world and see him 21 of 26 times doing
now,
that.
Some people I've talked to people who've said you're responsible in a very important way for the 26 or 28, or whatever it was, Astro Weeks. Is that true, that you actually had something to do with it?
You know, I would say this. I sat in that audience over those two nights, and we had the good fortune of befriending many of the musicians in the band. We've come to know them, and we regard them as friends. And I wrote a letter to Van, and it was delivered to him backstage. And the letter basically said, I'm telling you, this has to go further than just these two gigs, because people are responding with great enthusiasm over the experience of reliving his seminal album from 1968, Astro Weeks, live. And it was spectacular. And I'm told that Van read that letter backstage, and there was a discussion that ensued. And 2 months later, it was announced that there was going to be an ongoing series of concerts all over the country. And so I you know, if I was in any way responsible for that, I'm grateful.
You should be.
And I'm pleased that it happened, and it was absolutely an experience of a lifetime. And we've had many.
Tell us about the two early venues. How old were you when you went to the two Detroit venues?
Yeah, I was in my teens, 16, 17 years old.
What were the venues like?
Oh, the Fox Theater is a wonderful, small, intimate, 5,000 person venue. The Masonic Temple, very similar.
Yes.
Might even be less than 5. It could be 3,000. And those were the kinds of performances that Van was doing back then. He's never been an artist who wants to perform at a big outdoor venue, though he does.
No, the Safari Room.
He likes the intimate venues. The fact is, the very last gig that I saw before COVID was at the Yoshi's Oakland Club of 250 people back last March.
And now, how did you get tickets for? You told me you had tickets for 3 nights. How did you get tickets?
You know what? It was luck of the draw, because we thought to ourselves that there's no way these are small venues, 250 seats, and they're going on the market. And when they go on the market, Van sells out within minutes.
Yes.
And so my wife and I happened to be in a restaurant when it was announced that Ticketmaster was putting these 3 gigs up for sale. We've learned to be very speedy on the keyboard in order to get tickets for any of Van's gigs anytime. And we thought, what are the chances? And I took the first night, and Lori took the second night, and worked on trying to get the third night, and boom, 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 we were fortunate enough to get tickets for all 3 nights. Little did we know these were going to be the last performances for well over a year, and they were absolutely stellar performances in a very small venue where Van really feels the most comfortable. We were literally this far apart, sitting there watching him perform with his band.
No, this isn't anything that was on the script we talked about. I had some questions for Michael, but one's just come to mind. You've seen him so many times. Who are your favorite acts that he's performed with? You know, like I like Jimmy Witherspoon. You know, John Lee Hooker. Give us your insight into some of the acts.
There's so many great talents that
Yes.
he's worked with over the years, and we've seen numbers of them. Taj Mahal comes to mind.
Favorite? I can't really say. Solomon Burke was fantastic. We saw them perform together at the Switzerland Montreux Jazz Festival. It was Solomon Burke and Dr. John, and I met them. And I mean, look, these are incredible performances. And he brings out guests like Dion. You know, he brings people out of the woodwork that we hadn't seen in years to do a song or two. Tom Jones, another great favorite of mine, performs with him every now and again. And Elizabeth, George Benson.
How about this Charlie Gracie at Butterfly? Nobody even knows who Charlie Gracie is. I still performing to this day in his age.
He opened up for band for a period of a few months.
Charlie Gracie, Butterfly, 1957. So he comes and opens for Van and performs a little bit with Van. And so I catch him to do a short interview. I said, what is it like to perform with Van? What do you remember most? What he remembers is you stay in the best hotel, you got a driver and a car, and he's paying you top dollar. In other words, Van treats these guys so well. And here's what Charlie Gracie said. He said, I have some great memories. So, Michael, what are your most significant memorable, get the words right, thoughts on being in and around Van Morrison? And you only have 2 hours. So
all right, well, first of all, as you just said, he's noted for being very generous. I know that the musicians say that all the time.
Yes.
He takes care of his musicians very well. Most memorable, gosh, there's a lot of them. The tour that first introduced us to his homeland, Belfast, was created by a Van addict friend of ours named Bob Kroll, who in 2012 put together this idea that we should all travel to Ireland in Belfast and spend some time and go around and see Van's haunts. And so there were, I don't know, a couple dozen of us that did this, and it was our first trip to Belfast, and it was an unbelievable experience for us because we were able to travel down Cypress Avenue, go to Hindford Street where Van grew up, where his family lived, and there's a plaque on the wall, you know, past home of Van Morrison. We saw where he wrote Brown Eyed Girl down in the hollow. And it was the most unbelievable experience, and we met all these wonderful Irish people, like Maurice Kincaid, who was the founder and or president of the Belfast Arts Association, and created events there after that. After we met him, we became friends and are still friends to this day. So that first experience going to Ireland was absolutely the most spectacular experience for so many of us. Busloads of us traveling around and seeing Van sites. And we stayed in the Culloden Hotel, which is owned by the Hastings Group. Howard Hastings, good friend of Van, whose offices are right there on the grounds. Van's offices are right there on the Culloden Hotel grounds. We got to spend time right there with Van. He would be there every day having tea and was gracious and receptive to us. We spoke, and it was a wonderful experience. And so I mentioned this fellow, Maurice Kincaid. A few years later, he put together a few gigs in August to commemorate Van's birthday. 5 years ago, we were over there to see Van Morrison's 70th birthday, and he performed on Cypress Avenue. We did 2 gigs live, and there were, probably about 200 of us Van addicts there. So we had a big party. Pre and post the gigs.
Yeah.
The gigs were broadcast on the BBC. You can see them. They were recorded professionally, and we had the opportunity to meet Ralph McLean, who is a notable BBC broadcaster. He interviewed us and did a special called The Van Addicts. Interviewed myself and a number of other members of our little group. and introduced all of us to the UK. That was a spectacular event, and we were there celebrating Van's 70th birthday.
Wow.
And then one more highlight. My wife and I buy our tickets. We don't ask for comps or anything like that. We become friends with the band and management and so on, but we pay our own way. And when Van was going to be performing at the Royal Albert Hall in London, storied Royal Albert Hall, my wife Lori called the Royal Albert Hall to get suggestions on where we might want to purchase tickets. They were available in a couple of different areas, and we'd not been there. So they gave us some advice, and we ended up buying tickets in a particular location. We got to the venue. The usher takes our tickets and says, "Follow me." We walk over to what appears to be a private suite. He unlocks the door, and we start to walk in, and there's a couple sitting right over here, and then there's a couple of chairs next to this couple. The man gets up and walks over to us, and he says to me, "Hi, I'm Eric, and this is my wife, Malia." And I said, "Well, of course you know who we are." This was Eric Clapton.
Oh, great.
And his wife.
Uh-huh.
And so for the next 2.5 hours, we sat and watched together with the Claptons. And Eric was as nice as can be. He was on the phone talking to his kids, reminding them to brush their teeth and to get in their pajamas and get into bed. And when Van played Caravan, he, like the rest of us, stood up and applauded. And it was just an unbelievable experience. So among many great experiences that we've had, that was at the top of the list as well.
Well, let me ask you a question that's not on the list. One of the things that I was intrigued by when I started my research was the number of fan magazines. Simon G, I think, had the best wavelength, and there was a fella at the University of British Columbia, Simon Fraser, who had one. And to a person, these magazines were just incredible in the amount of knowledge and history. As you know, my PhD's in history. And I thought this is a whole part of pop culture in both the UK and here that sort of has gone unnoticed in these magazines. And even the obscure ones, Michael Fishman, who works in a New York university, had a very small, very brief fanzine that was wonderful. And one of them, I think it was called Into the Music, had just 10 issues. But my point is, from all this, the fans were really, really knowledgeable and able to bring out the most positive things about Van. Now, let's turn and get to the nasty side. If you look at the British press, Van will come in and they'll ask him, like when he did the It's Too Late to Stop Now tour, "Well, what do you think about drugs?" Well, what can he say? "Are you a moron?" He said, what a stupid question. And so as I've researched Van from basically them, actually even the Monarchs, Bozo Hully Gully, up to the present, he's had to sit with journalists who are, how do I say it nicely, morons. And they haven't listened to the music. They're entitled. They think there's something special. And he's gotten a reputation for being nasty, which to them I would be nasty, but others who come with their questions and know what they're doing, and particularly the Irish ones, he does very well. So when you write about Van, it's almost like there's two Vans, and then there's the real Van. So now you have three Vans, the mythical Van, the Van they criticize, the real Van. And I think one of the most interesting things about Van Morrison is his creativity. I mean, who can take a person like PJ Proby, who I know a little bit, and basically ask what happened to him in song, and then bring him on stage, and PJ's happy to do it. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is people like Simon G and others, Bernard McGuinn, who's just a fan in England, these people are so knowledgeable, so sharing. There's so many things I've learned from them, and yet there's other journalists who, if you say something to them, "Oh, that can't be true." Well, so-and-so was with Van, like you, and told me this. Well, tell me the dirt. There is no dirt. And this is one of the things that bothers me, is particularly the British press, not so much us. And once when I was talking with someone who's, I guess you would say, rather famous, I won't tell you who, I had Mark Knopfler next to me. And Mark introduced me, and said, this was in the 80s. Mark wasn't playing with Van then, once in a while, and he had a show in Marin that he did, a Blue Monday, a Monday night show. It was televised, and broadcasts and everything. So this person is talking to me, and Mark is telling me about my 1983 book. I said this is Howard DeWitt, blah, blah, blah. The person wasn't paying attention. When I left, the person shook my hand and said, "It's really good to meet you, Greel." So my point is, a lot of times when you're talking to people, it's like talking to my students. If I'm giving a bad lecture, they tune me out. And so the point is, there's so much fascinating material in distilling all this, and that's why having you here to distill it. Now, I want to ask you a couple of the last.
Well, let me speak to that. I
yeah.
can only say this. We all know that the press can be manipulative.
Yes.
My personal experience with Van has been, he's been extremely gracious and friendly to me and to many, many of our friends. When we've had the opportunities and the grounds that he feels most comfortable, when we're in Ireland, he's appreciative that we're there. He does recognize us. He knows his fans.
Yes.
And so I have found him to be, look, he's an introvert in an extrovert business.
Yeah.
He was never interested in all of the publicity. He said this ad nauseum.
Yeah.
That he's a
From day one.
performer who doesn't particularly love to perform, doesn't feel great about hundreds of people staring at him while he's up on stage, and has often been characterized as brusque.
Yeah.
And it's, in my opinion, it's manipulative on the part of the media.
You're getting to the point of the story.
Yeah.
Why must I always explain?
Yeah, exactly.
So from day one in his songwriting, and tell me, add themes that go beyond this. Why must I always explain? To the press.
Yeah.
The idea of not being respected and recognized, the idea of not being left alone, the idea is don't interpret my songs. They mean nothing. So guys like me who are interpreting, so if I try to interpret a song, what do? I get the lyrics and I'll find there's a song that mentions a pub. Well, maybe Van wasn't referring to that pub. Maybe he's just using that name, and so it drives him crazy.
And everybody has some nostalgic remembrance of where they were when they heard a Van Morrison song, or how they interpreted his writings, and then want to drill down on the specifics. Heck, he doesn't even remember necessarily what it was he was specifically thinking at that time. We're talking about material that goes back 40, 50 years.
Yes.
I'll give you a great example of Van's graciousness in this one little encounter. When Van was performing in New York, and I think it was 2009 at Theater at Madison Square and at the Beacon Theater, he had several interviews set up. He was on Regis and Kathy Lee.
That wasn't WAMU, was it? The WAMU Theater?
No.
Okay.
He was set up to be interviewed by Regis and Kathy Lee. I was there in that studio. The next day, he had an interview with Don Imus, who was a great fan of Van and always played his music and always loved his music. And so I was there, and this was during the Astro Weeks tour, and I was at the studio with the original vinyl copy from 1968 of Astro Weeks, and Imus saw it and offered on the air to buy it from me. He started out at $100. He went to $250. He went to $500. I think he went to $1,000. He may have gone higher. It may have been $5,000. Okay, $5,000.
Yeah.
And I refused. And then he was just irritated, and he didn't want me to be in the studio. So as the interview ended, Van walked over to me, and he said to me, "Why wouldn't you sell it?" I said, it meant too much to me. It was my first ever copy of your Astro Weeks legendary album, and it was too personal to me. So Van grabbed it from me and signed it. And I turned it around to show it to Imus, and I said, "Don, what's it worth now?" That didn't go over too well with Imus, but he was a crusty guy too.
Yeah.
I loved him, and Van was, he appreciated that I wasn't going to part company, because often he was concerned that people were selling his works with his autograph for their own personal gain. And obviously a lot of musicians feel that way. They don't want to.
As they should.
But Van has constantly been seen signing autographs outside of venues and anywhere else. And he's been extremely generous with his time. And he's philanthropic. I mean, he's done some things that people don't know anything about. And so
he prefers it that way.
And I respect that.
Yeah. Now, you've been interviewed a lot. What's the one question about your Venatic career you've never been asked, or what's the one thing that you'd like to tell us that no one knows?
The only thing I can think of is, does Van really like me? And I have no idea. I don't. No, I mean, I don't know. Look, people often thought that he had no idea how deep his fan base goes. And I think he's come to realize
Yes.
he's
Finally.
had some great managers
Yes.
over the years. He's got great management right now, and I think his eyes are wide open. We've had the great pleasure of meeting so many members of the band and have become friends with them. And greats like Jay Berliner, who played on the original Astro Weeks album and has come back over the
Yeah.
last few years and is one of Van's favorite musicians. And
Yeah.
John Platania, a great original musician.
Yes.
David Hayes,
Yes.
Paul Moran, his musical director,
Yes.
Tina Lyle, Dana Masters, Paul Moore. These are guys that we've come to know and respect and love. Karen Hamill, background singer for Van over the years. So it's been a tremendous relationship that I've had the pleasure of having with some of these musicians and getting closer and getting to know more about the work that goes into developing this music. Look, this is a guy who's now almost 76 years old. In the last 2.5 years, he's released 5 new albums. The thing that he talks about often, as Ricky Nelson did in Garden Party, is everybody thinks of me for Brown Eyed Girl and Moondance and Domino and Wild Night, and he's got such a wide array and body of music going back decades.
Yes.
42 studio albums. This
Yes.
new album coming out May 7th will be his 42nd, and
Wow.
it's a double record collection called Latest Record Project, Volume 1. So we hope there'll be Volume 2, 3, whatever. He's still working. He's still prolific, and I have deep respect for his craft and for him as a performer. And I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to be surrounded by all these Van fans that I've come to know, and that is truly the greatest treasure of being a Van fan, is all the people that we've met, like Deadheads. I mean, it's the same thing.
Well, I can remember in San Francisco when I was just getting started, there's an obscure lawyer there by the name of Art Siegel. And Art Siegel, to me, is typical of the fanatic. He's helpful, he shares, he's interesting, he's critical, he really knows what he's doing. And when I look at all these people that I've come into contact with, people I hardly know who live all over the world and are kind and nice to me and share things, that is, like you say, it's a community, and the community's not going to be there anytime soon. Now, you don't have to answer this question, but I'm going to put you on the spot, Michael. Not me. You can't say a word about me. Who's your favorite Van writer, if you have one? Doesn't have to be a book writer. It can be a journalist. It can be anybody. And it could be no answer.
There have been so many books written about Van, and each one of them has its own unique perspective.
Yes.
That I wouldn't want to specify one particular writer.
I understand that.
I've read them all.
Yeah.
Yours are great.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you. That's
and
why you got the gig today.
And the fact is, it just exemplifies the passion that
Yes.
has been there all
Yes.
these years
Yes.
for his music. And
Yes.
we
Yes.
fans can't read enough
Yes.
and can't listen to enough. So we're just grateful that he continues to provide us.
There's a huge picture book, It's Too Late to Stop Now, by Steve Turner. And wonderful book. Steve is a Christian writer. He's a rock writer. And he's gone into a subject maybe we all go into, but Van's spiritual interests, I think, are fascinating because his spiritual interests come right into his intellectual interests. So the Agape Church in Los Angeles, he will perform there. They broadcast it, and if people know Van is coming, suddenly the audience is about double what it was before.
Michael Beckwith.
Yeah, but that's, to me, the most interesting. Van has got this spiritual, intellectual journey, this side about him
Right.
that a lot of people have done great things with it. I think Peter Mill's book has done, a terrific job, and others.
Well, and
Eric
he's a voracious reader.
Yes,
I mean,
all the
the
time.
guy reads things
Yes.
and conjures up images that come from books.
Yes.
So he's an incredibly intelligent and
Yes.
deep individual.
The greatest story about the press is this, in my mind. He's living in London. I don't remember exactly the decade. It was the 80s or 90s. And he opens one of the newspapers, and they're describing him as a rock star, and they're describing him this way. He walks over to his desk, and he writes a handwritten letter and sends it to him. Well, the damn newspaper publishes the letter, and and then somebody inside, I got this from a person inside, somebody stole the letter to try to sell it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is the kind of crap that Van Morrison has to deal with. He's just writing a letter saying, all the letter said is, I'm not a rock star. I record in a number of areas. It was a very heartfelt letter. Right. So somebody's going to sell it. So then about, I don't know when, probably about just 3-4 years ago, somebody came upon letters he wrote from New York and Boston, I think one from Woodstock, to Mick Cox, who was dead. Those were sold on the internet. And then they were sold by what's that real fancy London firm that, can't remember the name of it, that everybody's. So some absolute fool puts these letters on the internet and says, if you want to buy these, here they are. So everybody I know copied the letters. Well, back to Van Morrison. If I'm Van Morrison, I'm not real happy about this.
And that's fair enough.
Yeah.
There are so many. Look, everybody in entertainment deals with that.
Yeah.
And Van has written about it.
Yes.
And when he does, people complain that he's complaining, and how can he complain? But you know what? Look, he's a human.
Yeah.
He's a real living, breathing person.
Yes.
Who does this for a living. It is a job. He's noted
good at it.
in many of his songs. He's talked about this as a job, and he's focused, and he's very, very diligent about what he does, and I give him great respect for.
When this book came out, just about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, whatever it was, 8 months ago, I got all kinds of really nasty, I guess you would say, criticism from people associated with Warner Brothers. And the best one is this. I get criticism from a guy I interviewed who told me half the tales I used in the book. So I called him and said, remember when you told me those tales? He said, yeah. He said, I didn't use your name, did I? No. I said, are the tales true? Yeah. I said, well, what's your complaint? He said, my complaint is, why should the musicians have the power to get the money due them? And I said, what do you mean? That's the stupidest question I've ever heard. He said, well, think of all the money we lose on other people, so we like to not pay our artists what they're worth so we could recoup the money we lose on other people. I said, I'm not sure I believe this. I've never told this story. And one of them who did this was the head of Warner Brothers. So if you look at the last 5 heads, you'll figure out who it is. And he was very nice to me. Yeah. But he said, you're too hard. And I had other rock writers associated who work with record labels. And my point of this silly little story is, if you weren't Van and if you didn't hit them as hard as you could, you wouldn't get your money. My friend who worked on the Rodriguez Searching for Sugar Man, Steve Rowland, he was paid, but he always has trouble. And I won't go into it's personal. I won't tell you about his troubles, but he was typical. When I worked and talked a little bit, I talked with Paul Revere for a time. I worked with Jimmy McCracken, who's a blues singer. They all had the same thing. They had to literally go to the record label and rip the shirt off the people that paid, or rip the shirt off the Len Warnaker, or any of those guys. And after a while, most of them would give up. We get enough money from touring. I'm rich. They still owe me. So the last part of the story is this. I'm interviewing, years ago, 1999, I'm interviewing Brenda Lee and her husband. Her husband's a contractor, but he's a businessman. So he tells me, well, Decca owed us $15 million. I went to Decca and I said, here's a letter. I said, read the letter. It's notarized by my lawyer. You have a check tomorrow for $5 million for me, or we're suing for the $15 million. Brenda Lee's husband comes back and there's the check for $5 million.
I mean, there's innumerable stories of musicians who have been held back and not gotten their royalties and not gotten monies. Yeah. We all know that exists.
Yeah. And their careers don't continue. That's my point.
And speaking of your last book, I have an autographed copy from you, which I have put on eBay, and I'm trying to sell it, and so far, no takers.
But $4.95. The book sells for $17.95. But you autographed it too.
I will never sell one of your works, especially if you've autographed it.
We need to get Right Wing Walters. Maybe a year from now we'll do a thing with Right Wing Walter. Do you think you can contact him?
I have some inner
Well, every time I see him, he wants something in front of his face like this.
Yeah, anonymous is best in certain situations.
Let's look at my questions and see if there's anything. We're getting near the end here. Damn, you've done well today, Michael. We
Yeah.
appreciate 21 of 26 Astro Weeks concert, and the wife didn't divorce you?
No, she enjoyed every one of them.
Okay,
Are you kidding?
okay.
And I'm only sorry that we missed a few.
Okay.
It's a pleasure being here to speak
Thank
with you. It's a pleasure to talk about something that
Yeah.
we both share,
Yes.
and that is our love of Van Morrison.
And it's not going to, incidentally.
It ain't over.
Yeah, I want to know the last 5 albums. I think they're great, and the critics and the fans are like this. I mean, give him his due. Look at each song. Look at each album.
Listen,
they all say something.
There's been some treasures in those
Yes.
last albums,
Yes.
and we should be grateful. If you're a fan, you should
Yes.
be grateful. You can't be looking at everything like it should be Astro Weeks
Yes.
from 1968.
What's the album with the Indian on the front of it?
You
You know, it's a recent one. You know, the Indian guy.
I don't remember that.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to tell you in just a minute here. I don't know everything, Michael. I know 1/10 of what you know. Okay, so Van does. Is it Roll with the Punches?
Oh.
Yeah, you know, with the Indian guy in the front. He's a wrestler. It's a Canadian
Oh
wrestler.
yeah, well they changed that. They changed that cover.
Yeah,
because they got some
anyway.
flack about that.
He's a Native American.
Yes,
who
Native-
lives in
Native.
Canada, so Native Canadian. Okay,
Yeah.
here's my story.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I was a big fan of midget wrestling.
Hmm.
I used to see in Seattle Sky Lolo, Fuzzy Cupid, Little Beaver. And the guy on the cover came down and did one of his first wrestling matches in Seattle, this Indian guy. Seattle was
Yeah.
a big town. The Key Arena, we'd go down and see midget wrestling. And then it was so crazy because I remember seeing this guy. And then I see his name on there. It didn't look the same, of course, because years later. But the point of the story is Van can bring things out we have forgotten about. He's more of a historian than I am, and most of us, you're a historian. You know things. You know, you've got a big catch. I have a catch of things with Van. Van's the man. And
Yes.
my last thought to you was, you didn't know you were going to get this question. Where in the hell does Van store everything? I know he's got 2 storage sheds in Marin County, and I know he's got a storage shed up in Bath. I'd like to know where the rest is, and maybe we could put hoods on and masks and go in and rob the place and just take a few things.
I have no inside information about where
Neither
his
do I.
vaults are kept.
But my point is this. I want the 50 CD box set.
Yeah.
I want the 20 CD box set. I want the live performances. I want the outtakes, you know. There's a lot.
Well, one of the things we have suggested is that he make available his live performances, and that could be on his website, and people would pay for that.
We got to let you wrap this up. Michael,
All right.
I want to know exactly what we've missed in your experiences, and if we can bring you back another time.
I'm
maybe.
happy to come back anytime and talk to you.
Let's
It's
do
been a-
this 10
it's-
years from now.
It's been a pleasure. We don't have to wait 10 years.
Okay.
There are great experiences coming this year for his 76th birthday. We'll be talking about those.
Yeah,
at the end of the year.
I'm in France in July. We come home. I'm going to try to go. We'll see. But,
Okay.
you know, I had a birthday last month.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and so
big one. Happy birthday.
I'm trying to stay here. Before I go see John Lennon, I want to finish this 5-volume Van Morrison. Of course, I'll get up there and John Lennon will say, "This guy can't commit. He did all these 5 books on Van Morrison. He's going to bore me to death." Thank you, Michael.
Great to talk
You're
to you.
the best. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you.